The day I vanished, everyone cried at my funeral. The accident didn't take my life, it gave someone enough time to steal it. My name is Jaffet Jr. Until 8 months ago, I believed loyalty was something that couldn't be bought. I was wrong. I am the founder and CEO of MedNova Dynamics, a medical technology company based in Chicago. We designed portable diagnostic systems that allowed small hospitals and emergency clinics to detect life-threatening diseases within minutes instead of days. Watching our technology save lives gave me more satisfaction than any headline or financial report ever could. Success had changed my business. It had never changed my values. Every employee knew my office door stayed open. Every client knew my word meant something. And every Friday evening, no matter how busy life became, I went home before sunset, because there was someone waiting for me. My wife, Vanessa. She wasn't interested in luxury. She cared about ordinary moments. Coffee before sunrise, late-night conversations on our balcony, weekend road trips with no destination. She often reminded me that a successful marriage wasn't built during celebrations. It was built during ordinary days. I believed every word. We had been married for 11 years. Those years weren't perfect. No marriage ever is. But we always found our way back to each other before the day ended. That mattered. At least, I thought it did. There was another person who had shared almost every chapter of my adult life. Marcus Bennett. People constantly asked whether we were related. We laughed every time. "We're brothers by choice," Marcus always answered. He had joined my company during its earliest days, long before investors believed in us. When our first prototype failed, he stayed. When our biggest client walked away, he stayed. When banks refused another loan, he stayed. I trusted him enough to make him Chief Operating Officer. If I wasn't in the building, everyone knew Marcus spoke with my authority. He knew every contract, every investment, every long-term plan. I never imagined that trust could become the most expensive mistake of my life. The strange part is, nothing looked unusual. Marcus never argued with me. He never competed openly. He celebrated every achievement. He congratulated me after every successful deal. He stood beside me during every interview. Anyone watching us would have called us inseparable. But jealousy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it grows quietly, like rust beneath polished steel. You don't notice it until everything breaks. One Monday morning, our executive board gathered inside the conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. The atmosphere felt different. Months of negotiations had finally produced incredible news. A coalition of private hospitals wanted to purchase thousands of our newest diagnostic units. The agreement would allow us to expand into dozens of underserved communities. To me, the contract represented opportunity. To Marcus, I would later discover, it represented something completely different. The meeting ended with applause. Executives shook hands. Champagne bottles appeared. Everyone celebrated. Marcus wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "You finally did it, brother." I smiled. "We did it." He raised his glass. "To the future." Everyone repeated the toast. Only much later would I remember something unusual. Marcus never drank from his glass. He simply watched me. His smile reached his mouth. It never reached his eyes. That evening, Vanessa prepared my favorite dinner. We celebrated quietly on the terrace overlooking the city lights. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I've never seen you this happy." "I've never had more reasons to be." She smiled. "So what's next?" I laughed. "Tomorrow I fly to Seattle." The final partnership documents required my signature in person. Flying commercial would waste an entire day. Fortunately, the company owned a small private jet for executive travel. I planned to leave early the next morning and return before midnight. Vanessa teased me. "You'll probably answer emails before the wheels even leave the runway." "I'll try not to." She laughed. "I know you better than that." For a few moments, nothing existed except the two of us. No business, no deadlines, no pressure, just peace. If someone had walked onto that terrace and told me it would be the last quiet evening of my old life, I would never have believed them. Later that night, I received a text message from Marcus. Everything's ready for tomorrow. I'll meet you at the private hangar before departure. I replied with a simple thumbs up. Then I turned off my phone. Across the city, inside a dimly lit aircraft maintenance hangar, two mechanics quietly opened the engine compartment of my private jet. A black SUV rolled to a stop outside. A man stepped out. His face remained hidden in the darkness. He handed one of the mechanics a thick envelope. The mechanic counted the cash. Then he looked toward my aircraft. His voice was barely above a whisper. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone will believe it was just another tragic accident. The words echoed inside my mind long after I had gone to bed. Everyone will believe it was just another tragic accident. Of course, I hadn't heard them that night. If I had, I would never have boarded that aircraft. The next morning began like every other business trip. The sunrise painted Chicago in shades of gold. Vanessa was already in the kitchen pouring coffee. She looked up and smiled. "You actually slept." I needed it. She placed a mug in front of me. "You've been working non-stop for months." "I'll be home tonight." She reached across the table and adjusted my tie. "You promise?" "I promise." She kissed my cheek before handing me a small paper bag. My famous blueberry muffins. I laughed. "So that's your strategy. It works every time." We stood there for another minute without speaking. Neither of us knew it would be our last morning together. Not for a very long time. 40 minutes later, my driver pulled into the executive hangar at Chicago Executive Airport. The white private jet stood waiting on the apron. Its polished fuselage reflected the morning sun. I had flown aboard that aircraft dozens of times. Every trip had ended safely. There was no reason to think this one would be different. Marcus was already waiting near the entrance. He greeted me with a warm smile. "There he is." I shook his hand. "You came early. Wanted to wish my brother good luck." He handed me a leather folder. The Seattle documents. I opened it. Everything looked perfect. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled again. "I'll always have your back." Those words would haunt me later. We walked together toward the aircraft. Halfway there, Marcus stopped. "I'll let you get going." "You sure you don't want to come?" He shook his head. "Someone has to keep the company running." I nodded. "See you tonight." He raised his hand. "Safe flight." I climbed the stairs without looking back. From the terminal windows, Marcus watched until the cabin door closed. His smile disappeared. He pulled a phone from his pocket. A single message appeared. "Mechanic, the modification is complete." Marcus typed only 3 words. No mistakes. Then he locked the screen. Inside the aircraft, everything felt normal. Captain Richard Collins welcomed me aboard. "Good morning, Mr. Junior." "Morning, Captain. We're expecting smooth weather all the way to Seattle." "That's good news." The co-pilot completed the final checklist, while a flight attendant offered breakfast. I declined. Vanessa's muffins were still warm. I smiled as I opened the paper bag. She always insisted homemade food tasted better above the clouds. She was right. The engines started. Their familiar roar filled the cabin. Outside, the ground crew removed the wheel chocks. The aircraft slowly taxied toward the runway. I fastened my seatbelt and looked through the window. Another ordinary business trip. Nothing more. Meanwhile, less than a mile away, inside a black SUV parked outside the airport fence, 2 men watched through binoculars. One of them was the mechanic who had accepted the envelope the night before. His hands trembled. "I don't like this." His partner never looked away from the runway. "You already took the money. I thought we'd disable the flight." "We did." "What if someone else dies?" The other man remained silent. The mechanic swallowed hard. "Maybe we should call it off." "It's too late." He watched the aircraft stop at the end of the runway. There's no turning back now. The engines grew louder. The jet accelerated. Faster, faster. Then the nose lifted gracefully into the morning sky. Chicago became smaller beneath the wings. The city disappeared behind scattered clouds. Inside the cabin, I opened my laptop and reviewed the presentation for Seattle. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Or so I believed. 30,000 feet below, Marcus stood inside my office. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the skyline. His reflection stared back at him. He loosened his tie. For the first time in years, he was completely alone. Quietly, he whispered to himself, "It should have been me." Those 6 words explained everything. Years of applause. Years of interviews. Years of watching me receive recognition. Every achievement had quietly fed the resentment he never revealed. He didn't want my friendship anymore. He wanted my life. Back inside the aircraft, the seatbelt sign switched off. Captain Collins' calm voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude." I leaned back and finally relaxed. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly beneath us. Beautiful, peaceful, completely unaware that somewhere deep inside the aircraft, a damaged engine component had already begun to fail. The countdown had started. Neither the pilots, nor I, had any idea. The flight settled into a peaceful rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed. The engines produced the steady hum I had heard dozens of times before. I opened my laptop and reviewed the final presentation for the Seattle partnership. If everything went according to plan, Mednova Dynamics would begin supplying portable diagnostic systems to more than 300 rural hospitals across America. Thousands of families would receive faster diagnoses. That thought made every sacrifice worthwhile. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Junior, would you like another coffee?" "Yes, please." She returned moments later. "Captain Collins says we'll begin our descent in about 90 minutes. "Perfect, thank you." Outside the window, sunlight reflected across endless clouds. Everything looked peaceful. Inside the cockpit, Captain Richard Collins studied the instrument panel. Everything appeared normal. Until one warning light blinked. He frowned. "Engine 2 oil pressure." The light disappeared after 2 seconds. The captain exchanged a quick glance with his co-pilot. "Probably a faulty sensor." The co-pilot nodded. "It happens." Neither of them knew the damaged component hidden deep inside the engine was beginning to tear apart. Back in Chicago, Marcus entered my office for the second time that morning. He closed the door, locked it, then walked toward my desk. For years he had admired that office. Today, he sat in my chair. He slowly turned toward the city skyline. A satisfied smile crossed his face. His phone vibrated. "The mechanic." Marcus answered immediately. "Is it done?" "The aircraft took off." "I know that." There was hesitation. The damaged part should fail before landing. Marcus closed his eyes. "When it does, there won't be survivors." The mechanic remained silent. Marcus ended the call. He stared around my office, then quietly whispered, "Everything should have been mine." 36,000 feet above the Rocky Mountains. The warning light returned. This time, it stayed on. Captain Collins immediately sat upright. "That's not good." The co-pilot checked the engine data. "Oil pressure is dropping. Reduce thrust." The aircraft gently slowed. Inside the cabin, almost nobody noticed. I continued answering emails. The flight attendant kept serving drinks. Everything still appeared perfectly normal. Then, a loud metallic bang echoed through the aircraft. The entire cabin shook violently. Coffee spilled across my laptop. Passengers screamed. The aircraft suddenly rolled sharply to the right. Overhead compartments burst open. Bags crashed onto the aisle. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Captain Collins' voice interrupted the chaos. "This is the captain speaking. We've experienced an engine failure. We need everyone seated immediately." His calm voice couldn't hide the urgency. The aircraft continued shaking. Another explosion echoed outside. I looked through the window. Flames poured from the right engine. My heartbeat stopped. The wing itself was beginning to burn. The cabin filled with terrified voices. One woman clutched her little boy. A businessman whispered a prayer. The flight attendant struggled to remain standing. I tightened my seatbelt. For the first time in years, I truly believed I might die. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed continuously. Engine fire, hydraulic pressure dropping. Electrical failure. Captain Collins grabbed the controls. "Mayday!" Mayday. This is Executive Flight 721. We've lost Engine 2. We're declaring an emergency. Static answered. The radio signal faded. The co-pilot looked at the navigation screen. The nearest airport is too far. Captain Collins swallowed hard. We're putting her down. Where? He looked through the windshield. Snow-covered mountains stretched endlessly ahead. There. The co-pilot stared in disbelief. That's impossible. Captain Collins never looked away. It's our only chance. The aircraft descended rapidly. Passengers cried openly now. Some held hands. Others closed their eyes. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my wedding ring. I had removed it earlier while typing. Now I held it tightly in my palm. My thoughts weren't about money, or business, or success. They were about Vanessa. I had promised her. I'll be home tonight. The realization crushed me. I might never keep that promise. The aircraft dropped violently. Trees appeared beneath us. Closer, closer. Captain Collins shouted, "Brace!" The burning wing clipped the top of a pine tree. A second later, the entire aircraft disappeared into the forest. Everything became white. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The world spun faster than my mind could understand. Then, nothing. Thousands of miles away, Marcus sat inside my office watching the afternoon news. A breaking alert interrupted the broadcast. Private jet reported missing over the Rocky Mountains. His phone vibrated almost immediately. One short message appeared. "The signal is gone." Marcus slowly smiled. He believed his greatest obstacle had finally disappeared. He had no idea. The story was only beginning. That was the exact moment nothing would ever be the same again. The impact should have killed me. Every rescue expert who later studied the wreckage agreed on one thing. Nobody should have survived. The aircraft tore through hundreds of pine trees before slamming into the side of a mountain. The right wing separated first. The tail section broke apart seconds later. Fuel ignited across the snow-covered forest. Pieces of metal scattered for nearly half a mile. By every medical standard, there should have been no survivors. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't hear anything except a sharp ringing inside my head. Everything around me was blurred. Smoke drifted through broken branches. Snow melted beneath burning pieces of the aircraft. For several seconds, I couldn't understand where I was. Then the pain arrived. It felt as though every bone in my body had shattered at once. I tried moving my left arm. Nothing. My right leg answered with unbearable pain. Blood ran down my forehead into my eyes. I forced myself to breathe. The smell of burning fuel surrounded me. Somewhere nearby, someone cried for help. The voice lasted only a few seconds. Then silence returned. I wanted to answer. My body refused. Another explosion shook the mountains. Flames swallowed what remained of the fuselage. The heat became unbearable. Instinct took over. I dragged myself across the frozen ground, using my elbows. Every movement felt like knives cutting through my body. Broken branches tore my clothes. Sharp rocks ripped my hands. Still, I kept crawling, because stopping meant dying. Several minutes later, another explosion echoed behind me. The fireball illuminated the forest. The aircraft disappeared beneath smoke. I collapsed beside a fallen tree. My vision faded. Snow landed softly across my face. The cold should have frightened me. Instead, it felt peaceful. Darkness slowly closed around me. Hours later, search helicopters circled above the mountains. Emergency crews reached the crash site shortly before sunrise. They searched through burning debris. Every passenger seat was destroyed. Bodies were recovered. Identification became almost impossible. Captain Richard Collins was found still strapped inside the cockpit. The co-pilot never left his seat. The flight attendant was discovered several yards away. My seat was empty. Only my burned briefcase remained. Investigators assumed the explosion had thrown my body into the fire. Rescue teams expanded the search. For 3 days. They found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a trail. Not a single sign that anyone had escaped. On the 4th day, officials announced what everyone expected. All passengers are presumed dead. My name appeared on every national news network. The country mourned the tragic accident. Business leaders expressed condolences. Hospitals lowered their flags. Employees gathered outside Mednova Dynamics holding flowers and candles. Hundreds of people stood silently beneath the company headquarters. Some cried openly. Others simply stared at my photograph placed beside the entrance. Inside the building, Marcus played his role perfectly. His eyes were red. His voice trembled. He thanked employees for their loyalty. He promised the company would continue honoring my vision. Several television stations interviewed him. He called me my closest friend. Millions believed every word. That evening, Marcus visited Vanessa. She hadn't slept since the accident. The television continued replaying images of the burning mountains. She sat on the living room floor, holding my wedding photograph against her chest. Marcus quietly sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Vanessa whispered, "They haven't found him." Marcus lowered his eyes. "They probably never will." Tears rolled down her face. "I just wanted to say goodbye." Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here." She didn't answer. She simply cried harder. From that moment forward, Marcus rarely left her side. He organized meetings with lawyers. He helped answer reporters. He handled company decisions. Everyone praised his loyalty. Nobody questioned why he suddenly controlled every part of my life. Meanwhile, nearly 20 miles from the crash site, a retired park ranger named Samuel Carter followed unusual tracks through fresh snow. At first, he believed he was tracking an injured elk. Then he noticed something impossible: human blood. The trail continued through the trees. Several yards later, he stopped. A man lay unconscious beneath a fallen pine. His clothes were burned. His body was covered with cuts. His pulse was weak, but it was there. Samuel immediately called emergency services. As paramedics loaded me into the helicopter, he looked down at my burned face. Quietly, he said, "I don't know who you are, but someone up there wasn't finished with you yet." Far away in Chicago, the evening news interrupted its coverage of the crash with one final announcement. Recovery operations had officially ended. The case would now be treated as a fatal aviation accident. Marcus watched the report alone inside my office. He slowly opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside rested a bottle of expensive whiskey I had been saving for a special occasion. He poured himself a glass. Then he quietly sat in my chair, looking across the city skyline. He whispered 3 words. "Finally, it's mine." He believed the secret had been buried beneath the wreckage. He couldn't possibly know. The man he had tried to erase had just taken his first breath inside another hospital. When I opened my eyes again, everything was white. White walls, white ceiling, white sheets. For several seconds, I wondered if I had died after all. Then pain answered before anyone else could. Every breath burned. Every movement felt impossible. Machines surrounded my bed. A heart monitor echoed steadily through the room. A doctor noticed I was awake and immediately walked over. "Easy," he said calmly. "You're safe." I tried speaking. Only a broken whisper came out. "Where?" He leaned closer. "You're at St. Mary's Regional Medical Center. You've been unconscious for 12 days. 12 days. The number meant nothing, because I couldn't remember what had happened 12 hours earlier. The doctor asked a simple question. "What is your name?" I stared at him. Nothing. My mind was completely empty. He asked again, "Can you tell me your name?" I wanted to answer. I truly did. But there was only silence. I don't know." The doctor sighed gently. "You suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. The good news is, you're alive. The difficult news is, you've lost your memory." I closed my eyes. How could someone forget his own name? Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Every sunrise looked the same. Physical therapy replaced business meetings. Hospital corridors replaced airport lounges. Learning to stand became more important than signing contracts. At first, I couldn't even lift a glass of water without shaking. My left shoulder had been fractured. 3 ribs were broken. My right knee required reconstructive surgery. The burns on my arms healed slowly. The scar across my forehead remained. The therapists celebrated tiny victories. One extra step. One extra minute standing. One extra memory. But every night ended the same way. I still didn't know who I was. Because no identification had survived the crash, the hospital listed me as unknown male. Police searched missing person databases across several states. Nothing matched. The aircraft had burned almost everything. No fingerprints could be compared immediately because of the injuries. No wallet. No phone. No passport. Legally, I didn't exist. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, more than 3,000 people attended my memorial service. Employees filled the church long before sunrise. Doctors, nurses, business leaders, friends, clients, people whose lives I had never even met. Everyone came to say goodbye. My framed photograph stood beside a simple wooden casket. Inside, there was no body, only flowers. Vanessa couldn't stop crying. She wore black from head to toe. She kept staring at the empty casket, as if refusing to believe it. Marcus stood beside her through the entire ceremony. Whenever she struggled to remain standing, he held her arm. Whenever reporters approached, he answered for her. Everyone praised him. What a loyal friend. What an incredible man. Every compliment strengthened the lie. 3 months later, the board of directors gathered inside the headquarters of MedNova Dynamics. The atmosphere felt heavy. Our attorney addressed everyone. According to the succession agreement, Mr. Marcus Bennett will become interim chief executive officer. Nobody objected. Marcus lowered his head respectfully. I never wanted this responsibility. I only want to protect Japhet's legacy. The room applauded. Only Marcus knew. Protecting my legacy had never been his plan. Owning it was. Back at the rehabilitation center, something strange began happening. Small flashes interrupted my sleep. A woman's smile. A conference room. A silver airplane. Someone shaking my hand. The memories disappeared before I could understand them. One afternoon, my therapist handed me a newspaper. We use familiar images to stimulate memory. I barely glanced at it. Then my eyes froze. The front page showed a photograph of a company headquarters. Something inside me shifted. Without thinking, I whispered, I know that building. The therapist looked surprised. What building? I pointed toward the newspaper. I've been there. What's it called? I closed my eyes. The answer sat somewhere inside my mind. So close, yet impossible to reach. My head suddenly throbbed. Then another image exploded into my thoughts. A woman laughing. Blue eyes. Dark hair. She turned toward me and smiled. One word escaped my lips. Vanessa. Tears filled my eyes before I understood why. The therapist leaned forward. Who's Vanessa? I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. I only knew hearing her name made my chest ache. The following week, another memory returned. A boardroom. A handshake. Someone saying, Congratulations, Mr. Junior. Mr. Junior. My heartbeat accelerated. Junior. The therapist smiled. Does that sound familiar? I nodded slowly. My name. I think. My name is. Before I could finish, a sharp pain exploded behind my eyes. The room spun violently. The machines began beeping faster. Doctors rushed inside. Everything faded to black once again. When I finally woke hours later, one memory remained. Not my company, not my house, not even my own face. Just one name. Japhet Jr. And somehow, I knew that remembering my name was only the beginning. Because somewhere beyond those hospital walls, someone was living the life that belonged to me. The church doors opened with a slow, heavy creak. Every conversation stopped. The pianist froze in the middle of the wedding march. More than 200 guests turned toward the entrance. For a moment, nobody breathed. I stood there wearing a dark suit borrowed from the rehabilitation center's chaplain. The scar across my forehead was still visible. My left hand trembled slightly from the nerve damage. Months of physical therapy had taught me how to walk again. Every step toward the altar reminded me of the price I had paid just to be standing there. Vanessa slowly turned around. The bouquet slipped from her hands. White roses scattered across the polished floor. Her lips parted. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Japhet, the word escaped her like a prayer. Marcus looked at me as though he had seen a ghost. Every trace of color disappeared from his face. He took one step backward. No, he whispered so quietly that only the minister beside him heard. That's impossible. The guests began whispering. Several people stood from their seats. One woman covered her mouth. Another crossed herself. The minister looked from Marcus to me with complete confusion. I don't understand. Neither did anyone else. According to every official report, I had died 8 months earlier. I walked slowly down the center aisle. Nobody tried to stop me. The silence became heavier with every step. Vanessa couldn't take her eyes off me. I thought... She struggled to breathe. I thought you were gone. I know. My voice remained calm. I know what everyone believed. Marcus suddenly found his voice. This has to be some kind of mistake. He forced a nervous laugh. You can't be Japhet. I looked directly into his eyes. You paid 2 mechanics to make sure I never came home. His smile disappeared instantly. The entire church became silent again. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Marcus shook his head. He's confused. He survived a terrible accident. The trauma has affected his memory. Several guests nodded uncertainly. For a second, his lie almost worked. Then I reached inside my briefcase. I removed a thick envelope. I spent months wondering why my aircraft fell from the sky. I placed several photographs on the front pew. Then I found the answer. The first photograph showed Marcus entering a maintenance hangar the night before my flight. The second showed him handing a thick envelope to 2 licensed aircraft mechanics. The third showed bank transfers made through shell companies 3 days before the crash. Gasps echoed throughout the church. Marcus stared at the photographs. His hands began shaking. Vanessa looked down at the images, then back at Marcus. What is this? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I calmly continued. The National Transportation Safety Board recovered the damaged engine. They discovered the failure wasn't mechanical. It was deliberate. I removed another document. This is the forensic report. It confirms someone intentionally loosened critical engine components before takeoff. The minister slowly stepped away from Marcus. Guests moved back from him as well. Vanessa's breathing became uneven. She looked at Marcus with complete disbelief. Tell me he's lying. Marcus reached toward her. Vanessa. She pulled away immediately. Tell me. He lowered his head. For the first time since I entered the church, he had no lie left. Police officers quietly entered through the rear doors. They had been waiting outside. The lead detective walked toward Marcus. Marcus Bennett. You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, multiple counts of homicide, and aircraft sabotage. The handcuffs clicked loudly inside the silent church. Marcus looked at me one last time. I only wanted... His voice broke. The life you had. I looked at him without anger. You could have built your own. The officers led him away. No one spoke. Vanessa remained standing beside the altar, tears running freely down her face. The wedding had ended before a single vow had been spoken. And for the first time in 8 months, the truth had finally walked through the front door. Watching Marcus leave in handcuffs should have filled me with satisfaction. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For 8 months, anger had quietly lived inside me. It kept me awake through painful surgeries. It pushed me through endless rehabilitation sessions. It reminded me every morning that someone had tried to erase my existence. But as the church doors closed behind Marcus, the anger disappeared. It had nowhere left to live. The guests slowly began leaving in complete silence. Nobody celebrated. Nobody applauded. A wedding had become a crime scene. White flowers still decorated the altar. The wedding music had long since stopped. Only the sound of quiet footsteps remained. Vanessa stood alone, staring at the bouquet scattered across the floor. She looked smaller than I remembered, not because she had changed, but because guilt had become heavier than the wedding dress she wore. After several minutes, she finally walked toward me. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "I don't expect forgiveness." I remained silent. She lowered her head. "I truly believed you were gone." "I know. When they told me there were no survivors," her voice broke, "I buried the only man I ever wanted to grow old with." She wiped away another tear. "Marcus never forced me to love him. He slowly became the person who helped me survive my grief." She paused. "I never imagined he created the grief himself." I looked at her for a long moment. Pain still lived in her eyes. So did regret. But regret could never rewrite the past. "I don't hate you, Vanessa." She looked up. "I don't. No. Hate keeps people chained to yesterday. I've already spent too much time there." She began crying again. "I'm so sorry." "I know." Those two words carried more peace than years of arguments ever could. We hugged for the first time in almost a year. Not as husband and wife. Not as strangers. Simply as two people saying goodbye to the life they had once shared. Sometimes love ends long before the heart is ready to admit it. Weeks later, federal investigators completed their case. The two mechanics confessed. Financial records connected every payment directly to Marcus. Phone records proved months of planning. The aviation sabotage charges alone guaranteed he would spend decades behind bars. Several victims' families attended the sentencing. I attended too. Marcus looked older. Not because of time. Because lies eventually become too heavy to carry. Before the judge announced the sentence, Marcus turned toward me. "I spent years convincing myself you didn't deserve everything you had. I thought if you disappeared, your life would finally become mine." He lowered his eyes. "But I was wrong." I nodded quietly. "You never wanted my life. You wanted the respect I earned. And respect can never be stolen." The courtroom fell silent. Moments later, Marcus was led away forever. Months passed. Life slowly became ordinary again. I returned to Mednova Dynamics, not to celebrate surviving, but to continue the mission that had always mattered. We expanded our programs into underserved communities across the country. We donated portable diagnostic systems to rural hospitals that couldn't afford them. We created scholarships for engineering students who wanted to design technology that saved lives instead of chasing fame. Every new project reminded me why I had started the company. Purpose survives where pride cannot. One autumn morning, I stood inside the same executive hangar where my final flight had begun. A new aircraft waited outside. Reporters asked if I was afraid to fly again. I smiled. The sky didn't betray me. One man did. Fear had already stolen enough from my life. I wasn't going to let it steal my future too. As the aircraft lifted into the morning sunlight, I looked through the window.